The autumn air was crisp that morning in Hollow Creek, a small town nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains where everyone knew everyone else's business. Main Street was unusually crowded for a Saturday, with trucks parked along both sides and people gathering near the old community center. The annual charity auction was something folks looked forward to each year, a tradition that brought the whole town together to raise money for those who had fallen on hard times. Rebecca Chen stood near the back of the crowd, feeling a bit out of place as she always did at these gatherings. Her hand rested gently on her round belly. 8 months along now, and she could feel the baby moving inside her. She'd almost stayed home that morning. The farm had so much work that needed doing, and lately everything felt overwhelming. But something had pulled her out of bed. Some quiet voice telling her she needed to be there. The auction had been going smoothly for the past hour. Old furniture, handmade quilts, baskets of preserves, even a used tractor had all found buyers. People were laughing and chatting, the atmosphere light and cheerful. Then the auctioneer, old Tom Peterson, who ran the hardware store, cleared his throat in a way that made everyone go quiet. "Now, folks, this next item is a bit unusual," Tom said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "But desperate times call for creative solutions." The side door of the community center opened, and 2 figures stepped out onto the wooden platform. A tall man, maybe in his mid-30s, emerged first. His clothes were worn and dirty, hanging loose on his thin frame. His face bore the marks of a recent beating, one eye still swollen and purple, a cut healing on his lip. His hands were rough and calloused, the hands of someone who'd known hard labor his whole life. But it was his eyes that caught Rebecca's attention. They were empty, hollowed out by something far worse than physical pain. Behind him came a small boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old. The child clung to the man's leg, his tiny fingers gripping the fabric of his father's worn jeans. The boy's face was serious, too serious for someone so young. His clothes were as tattered as his father's, and his shoes had holes in them despite the coming winter. Tom cleared his throat again. "This here is Jacob Thorne and his boy Eli. Some of you might know Jacob from up in the mountains. He's come to us today with a proposal. He's offering himself and his son for a year of honest labor. In exchange, all he's asking for is food and shelter for them both." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Rebecca watched as people turned to their neighbors, whispering behind their hands. She caught fragments of conversation, drifting back to where she stood. "That's the gambling man from up near Eagle Ridge. Heard. He lost everything after his wife passed. Those loan sharks from the next county over caught up with him last week. Beat him pretty bad. He's got nothing left. Not even a roof over that boy's head." Tom raised his hand to quiet the crowd. "Now, I know this is unconventional, but Jacob came to me personally, and I believe he's sincere. He's a hard worker, always has been. Just hit a rough patch after losing his wife. He's looking for a fresh start, a chance to provide for his boy. The charity committee approved this, seeing as it's a way to help someone truly in need." Rebecca studied Jacob's face as Tom spoke. The man stood perfectly still, his jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on some point in the distance. She could see the shame radiating off him, the way his shoulders hunched forward as if he wished he could disappear. The little boy pressed closer to his father's leg, his thumb finding its way to his mouth. "So," Tom continued, "who'll start the bidding? Remember, you're getting a full year of labor here. Jacob knows farming, construction, animal husbandry. He can fix just about anything. And the boy, well, he's young, but he can help with lighter tasks." Silence fell over the crowd. Rebecca watched as people shifted uncomfortably, looking down at their feet or suddenly finding something fascinating in the distance. She saw Mrs. Patterson from the general store shake her head and turn away. Mr. Lee, who owned the biggest farm in the county, crossed his arms and frowned. The silence stretched on, becoming painful. Tom tried again. "Come now, folks. This is exactly what the charity auction is for. Helping our neighbors when they need it most. He brought this on himself," someone muttered from the crowd. "Gambling away his money while that boy went hungry." Another voice added, "Why should we bail out? Someone who made bad choices?" Rebecca felt something twist in her chest as she watched Jacob's face. He didn't react to the comments, didn't defend himself. He just stood there taking it all, as if he believed he deserved every bit of judgment being thrown his way. But the little boy, Eli, had started to tremble slightly, his eyes wide and frightened. Tom looked uncomfortable now. If there are no bids, then I'm afraid we'll have to. Rebecca's hand shot up before she could think about what she was doing. $500. Every head in the crowd turned to stare at her. The whispers started immediately, louder now, less discreet. Is that the Chen widow? She's 8 months pregnant. For heaven's sake. Her husband's been dead less than a year. That farm of hers is barely holding together. She can't possibly take on 2 more people to feed. Tom blinked in surprise. Did you say 500, Rebecca? Yes, she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. $500. Rebecca, are you sure about this? Tom asked gently. That's a lot of responsibility in your condition. She felt dozens of eyes boring into her, could sense the disapproval and concern radiating from the crowd. Her late husband David's parents were there somewhere, probably horrified by what she was doing. The baby kicked hard against her ribs as if offering an opinion on the matter. But when Rebecca looked at that platform, she didn't see a broken man and his child. She saw David, in those dark months after his father died when he'd struggled with grief and made poor choices. She saw herself alone on that farm, wondering how she'd manage with a newborn and no partner. She saw all the times in her own life when she'd needed someone to take a chance on her, to believe she was more than her worst moment. I'm sure, she said firmly. Tom nodded slowly. $500. Do I hear 600? Going once, going twice, and he paused, giving the crowd one last chance. No one spoke. Sold to Rebecca Chen for $500. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent crowd. On the platform, Jacob's head came up for the first time, his eyes finding Rebecca in the crowd. She couldn't read his expression. Surprised disbelief? Maybe a flicker of something that might have been hope, buried deep beneath layers of shame and defeat. Rebecca made her way through the crowd toward the platform, very aware of every person watching her, judging her decision. She could hear the whispers. Clearly now, that poor woman has lost her mind. Grief does strange things to people. She'll regret this within a week. Those 2 will rob her blind and disappear. As she climbed the steps to the platform, her legs felt shaky. What had she just done? She was barely keeping her own head above water, and now she'd just committed to feeding and housing 2 strangers for an entire year, with a baby coming in a month, on a farm that was falling apart because she couldn't maintain it alone. But when she reached Jacob and Eli and saw the boys' frightened eyes looking up at her, she knew she couldn't have made any other choice. Sometimes life asks you to do something that doesn't make sense on paper but makes perfect sense to your heart. Hello, she said quietly to them both. I'm Rebecca. Welcome to your new home. Jacob opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Finally, in a voice rough with emotion, he managed, Thank you, ma'am. We won't let you down. As they walked down from the platform together, Rebecca in front and Jacob and Eli following behind, she could feel the weight of the town's judgment settling on her shoulders. People parted to let them through, but their faces told the whole story. They thought she'd made a terrible mistake. They thought she was naive, foolish, probably headed for disaster. Maybe they were right. But as Rebecca led her 2 new house guests toward her truck, the baby kicked again and she chose to take it as a sign of approval. Sometimes the right choice isn't the safe choice. Sometimes helping someone means taking a risk that everyone else is too afraid to take. She just hoped she wasn't wrong. The drive back to the farm was quiet, except for the rumble of the old truck's engine. Rebecca kept her eyes on the winding mountain road while Jacob and Eli sat in the passenger seat, the boy perched on his father's lap. She could feel the tension radiating from them, thick and uncomfortable. Every few minutes she'd glance over and catch Jacob staring out the window with that same hollow expression from the auction platform. When they finally pulled up to the farmhouse, Rebecca felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. She'd been so focused on keeping things running that she hadn't really looked at the place through fresh eyes in months. The white paint on the house was peeling in long strips. The porch steps sagged in the middle. Weeds had taken over what used to be David's vegetable garden. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges, and half the fence posts around the pasture were leaning at dangerous angles. It's not much, she said quietly, turning off the engine. But it's home. Jacob nodded slowly, still not meeting her eyes. It's more than we had yesterday, ma'am. We're grateful. She led them around to the barn, where David had converted an old storage room into a small apartment years ago when his elderly father had needed a place to stay. It had a bed, a small wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a bathroom that David had plumbed himself. The space was dusty from months of disuse, but it was dry and warm and private. "I know it's not fancy," Rebecca said, pushing open the door, "but the bed's comfortable and the stove works well. Gets cold up here at night, but you'll stay warm enough." Eli's eyes widened as he looked around the room. It might have been small and dusty, but Rebecca suddenly realized it was probably the nicest place he'd lived in a long while. The boy walked slowly to the bed and touched the quilt with one small hand, as if checking to make sure it was real. Jacob cleared his throat. "This is more than generous, ma'am. We'll stay out of your way. Just tell us what needs doing and we'll do it." Rebecca pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, something she'd scribbled during the drive home. "I have a few rules. Nothing complicated. First, I expect honest work, but I also expect you to rest when you need to. No one's going to work themselves sick on my watch. Second, no drinking. I saw what alcohol did to my father, and I won't have it around my child. Third, we eat dinner together, 6 o'clock every evening. I don't care how tired you are or how much work is left. We sit down as a household and share a meal. Those are the only rules that matter." Jacob finally looked directly at her, and she saw surprise flicker across his weathered face. "You want us to eat with you? In your house? That's what I said, isn't it? Most people who take on workers don't." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Yes, ma'am. We'll be there." That first week passed in an uncomfortable dance of avoidance and awkward silences. Jacob rose before dawn each morning and worked until well after dark. He attacked every broken thing on the farm with an intensity that was almost frightening. He repaired the barn door, straightened fence posts, cleared the overgrown garden, fixed the porch steps, and patched holes in the roof that Rebecca hadn't even known were there. He moved like a man possessed, like he was trying to outrun something that lived inside his own head. Rebecca would watch him from the kitchen window sometimes, seeing the way he never stopped, never paused, barely even took water breaks. It was as if he believed that if he worked hard enough, long enough, he could somehow earn his way out of whatever darkness had swallowed him whole. Eli, meanwhile, became Rebecca's shadow. The boy wouldn't speak, hadn't spoken according to his father since his mother died 2 years back, but he followed Rebecca everywhere, watching her with those serious old eyes. When she fed the chickens, he was there. When she collected eggs, he held the basket. When she folded laundry, he sat on the floor nearby, silent and observant. At first, Rebecca tried to give him space, worried she was overwhelming the child. But she quickly realized that Eli seemed to need to be near someone, to not be alone with his thoughts. So she started narrating what she was doing, keeping up a gentle stream of conversation that never required him to respond. "See how the hens like to nest in the back corner? They feel safer there. Everyone needs a place where they feel safe, don't they? Oh, this one here is Henrietta. She's bossy, but she lays the best eggs. Do you want to try collecting this one? Just reach right under her, gentle now. That's it. You're doing great." Those first dinners together were painfully awkward. Jacob and Eli would arrive at exactly 6 o'clock, hands scrubbed clean, and sit stiffly at the table. Jacob barely ate, pushing food around his plate while keeping his eyes down. Eli ate quickly, mechanically, as if afraid the food might disappear if he wasn't fast enough. Rebecca tried to make conversation, but her questions were met with one-word answers or silent nods. The town watched Rebecca's gamble with barely concealed judgment. When she went into the general store for supplies, conversations would stop when she walked in. Mrs. Patterson would ring up her purchases with tight-lipped disapproval. At church on Sunday, people who had been friendly before now kept their distance, as if bad decisions might be contagious. "You're being foolish," David's mother told her after the service, pulling her aside. "Those people are strangers. That man has a history of bad choices. What happens when he steals from you, or worse? You're alone, pregnant, vulnerable." "I'm not as vulnerable as a man and a child sleeping in the woods," Rebecca replied quietly. "That's not your responsibility. Maybe it should be all of our responsibility." But the words from others dug under her skin more than she wanted to admit. Late at night, when she couldn't sleep because the baby was pressing on her bladder or her back ached, she'd lie in bed and wonder if everyone was right. She barely knew these people. Jacob was running from something. That much was clear. And what would happen when the baby came? How would she manage an infant with 2 strangers living in her barn? One morning in the second week, Rebecca woke to find the entire front porch rebuilt. Not just repaired, but completely rebuilt with new boards, solid and level, the kind of work that would last for decades. Jacob had done it overnight, working by lantern light. When she found him in the barn later that morning, she tried to thank him. "You didn't need to do all that. You paid good money for us, ma'am." "I aim to earn it." "I didn't buy you, Jacob. That's not what this is." He finally looked at her, and she saw something raw and wounded in his expression. "Then what is it? Charity? Pity? Because I've had enough of both to last a lifetime." Rebecca felt her temper flare, the pregnancy hormones making her emotions run hot. "You want to know what it is? It's one person trying to help another person. Because that's what decent humans are supposed to do. I don't care what mistakes you made. I don't care what brought you to that auction. You needed help and I could give it. That's all? Why?" The word came out almost as a plea. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't know what I've done. You're right, I don't. But I know what it's like to lose someone you love. I know what it's like when the world feels like it's ending and you can't see a way forward. My husband died 10 months ago. Heart attack, completely unexpected. He was 34 years old. One morning he was here and by afternoon he was gone. I spent months after that barely functioning, barely eating. If it wasn't for this baby, I don't know if I would have found a reason to keep going." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "My wife Ellen, cancer. She fought for 2 years. By the end she was so thin, so tired. But she never complained, not once. She made me promise to take care of Eli, to be strong for him. And I failed. I failed her and I failed that boy. After she died, I couldn't think straight. Couldn't sleep. Started gambling because those few hours at the card table were the only time I didn't think about her empty chair at dinner, or her clothes still hanging in the closet. Lost our house, our savings, everything. The loan sharks came for their money and I had nothing left to give them except a beating. And now you're here," Rebecca said gently, "and you get to choose what happens next. You can keep punishing yourself or you can start over. Those are really the only 2 options." Something shifted in Jacob's face. Not quite hope, but maybe the faintest possibility of it. "I don't know if I remember how to start over." "Then I guess we'll figure it out together." That evening at dinner, something was different. Jacob actually ate his food instead of moving it around the plate. And when Rebecca asked him about the crops he used to grow up on Eagle Ridge, he answered with more than 1 or 2 words. He talked about the apple trees his grandfather had planted, the cold spring water that ran through the property, the way morning fog would settle in the valleys like a blanket. Eli watched his father talk, and Rebecca saw something spark in the boy's eyes, something that looked almost like relief, as if hearing his father's voice again meant the man he'd known before grief swallowed him might still exist somewhere inside. After dinner, as they were clearing dishes, Eli tugged on Rebecca's sleeve. She looked down at him, and he pointed to a drawing tablet she kept on the counter. "Would you like to draw something?" she asked. He nodded, solemn and serious. She set him up at the kitchen table with the tablet and some colored pencils while she washed dishes. Jacob dried, and for the first time the silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. Through the window the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. When Eli finished his drawing, he brought it to Rebecca shyly. It showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a house, a tall figure, a small figure, and a round figure with a circle on her belly. Above them he'd drawn a shaky sun and colored it yellow. Rebecca felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Is this us?" Eli nodded. She knelt down, her pregnant belly making it awkward until she was eye level with him. "It's beautiful, Eli. Can I keep it?" He nodded again and then did something that surprised her. He stepped forward and wrapped his thin arms around her neck in a quick, fierce hug, before darting away toward the door where his father waited. After they left, Rebecca stood in her kitchen holding a child's drawing and crying for reasons she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was hormones. Maybe it was grief for her husband and the life they'd planned. Maybe it was hope for whatever strange new family was forming in the ruins of their old lives. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Winter was coming, and with it, Rebecca knew, more challenges than she could imagine. But for the first time since the auction, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they'd all survive this together. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a vengeance that caught everyone off guard. By mid-November, the first serious snow had already fallen, blanketing the farm in white and making every chore twice as difficult. Rebecca's due date was still 3 weeks away, but her body felt heavy and tired, ready to be done with pregnancy. She was in the kitchen making breakfast one morning when the first contraction hit. Not the gentle Braxton Hicks she'd been having for weeks, but something sharp and real that made her grip the counter and catch her breath. She looked at the clock. 5:30 in the morning. Jacob wouldn't be at the door for breakfast for another hour. The contraction passed and Rebecca tried to tell herself it was nothing. First babies always took their time, everyone said so. She had plenty of time to finish cooking, to eat, to maybe even drive herself to the hospital in town if things got serious. She cracked eggs into the pan and tried to ignore the nervous flutter in her chest. 20 minutes later, another contraction came, stronger than the first, then another 15 minutes after that. Rebecca abandoned the eggs and made her way to the phone, her hand shaking as she dialed the number for Dr. Martinez, the only doctor in Hollow Creek. The line rang, and she remembered with sinking dread that it was Thursday. Dr. Martinez went to the next county over every Thursday to work at the clinic there. The next contraction doubled her over, and this time she cried out despite herself. Through the kitchen window she could see snow beginning to fall again, thick and heavy. The wind howled around the house, rattling the windows. A storm was coming, a bad one by the looks of it. She tried calling the hospital in the bigger town 40 miles away, but the receptionist's words chilled her blood. "Ma'am, with this storm coming in, I don't know if you'll make it here in time. The roads up in the mountains are already getting bad. Is there anyone nearby who can help you?" Rebecca's mind raced through her options. David's parents lived 30 minutes away on a good day, but they were elderly and wouldn't be able to drive in this weather. Most of her neighbors had already made it clear they wanted nothing to do with her since the auction. And calling an ambulance meant waiting at least an hour for them to navigate the mountain roads, if they could even make it through the storm. Another contraction hit, and this time Rebecca found herself on her hands and knees on the kitchen floor, breathing through the pain. When it passed, she knew what she had to do. She pulled herself up and stumbled to the back door, yanking it open. The cold hit her like a physical blow. "Jacob!" she screamed into the pre-dawn darkness. "Jacob, I need help." In the barn, Jacob had been checking on the animals when he heard the scream. He'd never heard Rebecca sound like that, raw and frightened and desperate. He was out the door and running through the snow before he'd even fully processed what he'd heard. Eli appeared at his side, barefoot in his pajamas, his eyes wide with fear. They found Rebecca leaning against the doorframe, her face pale and twisted with pain. "The baby's coming," she gasped. "It's too early in the storm. I can't get to the hospital." Jacob felt ice flood through his veins, and for a moment he froze. He was a farmer, a laborer. He knew how to fix fences and tend crops and work with his hands, but this was beyond him. This was life and death, and he'd already proven he couldn't be trusted with something so precious. Then Rebecca's legs buckled, and instinct took over. He caught her before she fell, scooping her up in his arms. She was heavier than he expected, solid and real and depending on him in a way that terrified him. "Eli, run ahead and turn on all the lights in the house," he commanded, his voice steadier than he felt. "Then get every clean towel you can find." He carried Rebecca to her bedroom and laid her gently on the bed. She was breathing hard, her hands clutching her belly. "I'm scared," she whispered, and those two words broke something open in Jacob's chest. Here was this woman who had saved him and his son, who had taken them in when the whole world turned its back, and she was scared and in pain and trusting him to help her. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm scared too. But we're going to do this together, okay? You're not alone." Eli appeared with an armful of towels, his small face serious and determined. Jacob sent him to boil water, to find clean sheets, to locate scissors and string. All the things he vaguely remembered from when Ellen had delivered Eli in their cabin 7 years ago. That birth had been attended by Ellen's mother and 2 aunts, women who knew what they were doing. This time it was just him, a broken-down gambler who'd lost everything, trying to remember details through the fog of years and grief. The storm raged outside, howling like a living thing. Inside, Rebecca labored for hours that felt like days. Jacob stayed by her side, letting her squeeze his hand until his bones ached. Wiping her forehead with cool cloths, talking to her in a low, steady voice that masked his terror. "You're doing great," he told her during a brief respite between contractions. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, you know that? Taking us in like you did. Most people wouldn't have." Stupidest decision I ever made, she panted and then managed a weak smile. Present company excluded. I used to think that too, Jacob said. But maybe stupid decisions are just brave decisions that haven't worked out yet. Another contraction came, harder than the others, and Rebecca screamed. The sound cut through Jacob like a knife, bringing back memories of Ellen's final days, of feeling helpless while someone he cared about suffered. But this was different. This was about bringing life into the world, not watching it slip away. I can't do this, Rebecca sobbed when the contraction passed. It hurts too much. I can't. Jacob leaned close, making sure she could see his eyes. Yes, you can. You're already doing it. And I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Eli had been hovering in the doorway, watching with frightened eyes. But now he moved forward, climbing onto the bed. He took Rebecca's other hand in both of his small ones and held on tight. The gesture was so simple, so pure, that Rebecca started crying for reasons that had nothing to do with pain. As dawn broke and weak gray light filtered through the windows, things started happening fast. Jacob found himself coaching Rebecca through pushes, his hands steady despite his racing heart, falling back on instincts and half-remembered knowledge. The world narrowed down to this room, this moment, this woman fighting to bring her child into the world. And then suddenly there was a cry, not Rebecca's cry, but a new sound, high and thin and incredibly alive. Jacob's hands were shaking as he caught the tiny, slippery body, as he cleared the baby's airway and listened to those first precious breaths. A girl, perfect and pink and screaming her displeasure at this cold new world. You did it, he said, his voice cracking. Rebecca, you did it. You have a daughter. He wrapped the baby in a clean towel and placed her on Rebecca's chest. Rebecca's arms came around her daughter automatically, protectively, and the look on her face was something Jacob knew he'd remember for the rest of his life. Pure love, pure wonder, pure exhausted joy. Eli leaned over to peer at the baby, his eyes enormous. The infant had stopped crying and was making small snuffling noises. Her tiny fist waved in the air and Eli carefully extended one finger. The baby's hand closed around it, gripping tight. She's holding on to me, Eli whispered. And then, louder, with wonder in his voice, she's holding on to me. Jacob looked at his son, really looked at him and saw something he hadn't seen in 2 years. Life, animation, interest in something beyond survival. Eli was smiling, actually smiling at this tiny creature who had just entered their lives. Rebecca was crying and laughing at the same time. I need to call her something. I can't just call her baby forever. What about Grace? Jacob suggested quietly. It means a gift you don't deserve but receive anyway. Rebecca looked up at him, and in that moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with employer and worker, nothing to do with charity or obligation. It was understanding, connection, the recognition of two broken people who had somehow found their way to something that felt like family. Grace, she repeated softly. That's perfect. The storm continued outside, but inside the farmhouse everything felt warm and safe and right. Jacob took care of the practical things, the way he'd learned to do when Ellen had been sick. He cleaned up, made sure Rebecca was comfortable, fetched water and food. Eli refused to leave the bedside, fascinated by every small movement the baby made. Later that afternoon, when Rebecca and Grace were both sleeping, Jacob found himself standing at the window looking out at the snow-covered farm. Eli came to stand beside him, slipping his small hand into his father's larger one. Dad? The word was so soft Jacob almost thought he'd imagined it. Eli hadn't called him that in so long. He looked down at his son. Yeah, buddy? Are we going to stay here? With them? Jacob thought about the question, about the woman sleeping in the next room who had bet on him when no one else would, about the tiny life he'd just helped bring into the world, about the way something in his chest had started to thaw after 2 years of being frozen solid. I think so, he said. If they'll have us. Good, Eli said simply. Then after a pause, I like it here. That night, as they sat around Rebecca's bed eating a simple dinner of soup and bread, with baby Grace sleeping in a dresser drawer converted to a bassinet, it struck Jacob how strange and wonderful life could be. 2 months ago, he'd been at the absolute bottom, beaten and broken, ready to give up entirely. Now he was sitting in a warm room, watching a young mother coo over her newborn, listening to his son chatter about the chickens for the first time in 2 years. The town might still judge them, The future might still be uncertain. The debts from his past might still be waiting somewhere in the shadows. But in this moment, in this room, they were something that felt an awful lot like a family. Not the family any of them had planned. Not the family society would approve of, but a family nonetheless. Rebecca caught his eye and smiled. "Thank you," she mouthed silently over the baby's head. Jacob nodded, unable to find words for what he was feeling. How do you thank someone for saving your life when you hadn't even realized it needed saving? How do you express gratitude for being given a second chance you know you don't deserve? Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the old world under fresh white powder. And inside, 4 people who had been broken and alone began the slow, uncertain work of healing together. Spring came slowly to the mountains that year, melting the snow inch by inch and revealing the green world underneath. Rebecca stood on the newly rebuilt porch, baby Grace sleeping against her shoulder, watching Jacob and Eli work together to plant the vegetable garden. It had been 4 months since that terrifying night when Grace was born. 4 months of learning to be something that resembled a family. The town's attitude had begun to shift, slowly and grudgingly. People had heard about the emergency delivery, about how Jacob had stayed calm and brought both mother and baby through safely. They'd seen him at church every Sunday, had watched him help elderly Mrs. Chen fix her roof without being asked, had noticed how Eli had started talking again and even laughing sometimes. Hollow Creek was still wary, still watching, but the outright hostility had softened into something closer to cautious acceptance. Rebecca should have known that peace never lasted. It was a Tuesday morning when the truck pulled up the long driveway. Rebecca was inside nursing Grace when she heard the engine, rough and loud, not like any vehicle that belonged to their neighbors. She looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. 3 men climbed out of a black pickup truck. They were big, all of them, with the kind of hard faces that came from lives spent doing hard things. The one in front wore a leather jacket despite the warming weather, and he moved with the casual confidence of someone who was used to getting what he wanted through intimidation. In the garden, Jacob had gone completely still. Even from the house, Rebecca could see the color drain from his face. Eli moved closer to his father, and Jacob's hand came down protectively on the boy's shoulder. Rebecca handed Grace to her bassinet and went to the door, her heart hammering. She stepped onto the porch just as the 3 men reached Jacob in the garden. "Well, well," the man in the leather jacket said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Jacob Thorne, you're a hard man to track down." "Vincent," Jacob said quietly, "I didn't think you'd come this far. For $12,000 plus interest? I'd go to the end of the earth." Vincent looked around the farm with calculated interest. "Nice setup you got here, real nice. Shame you can't enjoy it, seeing as you owe me money." "I don't have it," Jacob said, and Rebecca could hear the defeat creeping into his voice. "You know I don't have it. Then we've got a problem." Vincent's eyes landed on the tractor parked near the barn. "I see some equipment here that might cover part of it. The rest, well, we'll have to get creative." Rebecca felt anger flare hot in her chest, burning away the fear. She walked down the porch steps and across the yard, moving to stand beside Jacob. "This is my property. That's my equipment. You have no right to take anything." Vincent looked at her with mild surprise, then his eyes dropped to her still rounded stomach and a slow smile spread across his face. "You must be the lady who bought him at that auction." "Heard about that. Charitable of you. But his debts aren't your problem, ma'am. This is between me and him." "Everything on this farm is my problem," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Jacob's debt is from before he came here. He's paid it off through honest work. Paid it off to you, maybe. Not to me." Vincent turned back to Jacob. "You got 2 choices, Thorne. You come with us right now and work off what you owe, or we take everything of value we can find here and call it even. Your choice." Jacob's jaw tightened. Rebecca could see him struggling, could practically watch him sliding back into that defeated, hopeless man from the auction platform. "Don't take anything from Rebecca," he said quietly. "This isn't her debt. It's mine. I'll go with you." "No," Rebecca said sharply. "You're not going anywhere. Rebecca, you don't understand what these men are capable of. I understand perfectly." She turned to Vincent, lifting her chin. "How much does he owe you?" "The actual amount, not your made-up interest." Vincent laughed. "You planning to pay off his debts?" "He owes $12,000 plus 6 months of interest at 30%. That comes to about $15,000, give or take. The number hit Rebecca like a physical blow. $15,000. She had maybe $3,000 in her savings account. Money she'd been holding on to for emergencies. The farm equipment was worth something, but it was all they had to work with. Without it, they couldn't plant crops or maintain the property. "Give me time," she heard herself say. "1 week. I'll get you the money." Vincent studied her for a long moment. "You're serious?" "Completely. And what's to stop your boy here from running the second we leave?" "I give you my word he'll be here," Rebecca said. "And unlike some people, I keep my word." Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, maybe respect, maybe just amusement. 1 week. "But if you don't have all of it, we're taking him and anything else we can carry. That's the deal." After they left, Jacob turned on Rebecca, and for the first time since he'd arrived, she saw real anger in his face. "What were you thinking? You can't possibly get that kind of money in a week. Now you've put yourself and Grace at risk for my mistakes." "It's not just your mistake anymore," Rebecca shot back. "We're a family, Jacob. That means we help each other. Or did the last 4 months mean nothing to you?" "It means everything to me, which is exactly why I should go with them. I won't drag you down with me." "Too late. You're already here. We're already dragged." Rebecca's voice softened. "Let me try at least. Let me ask for help. The town hates me. The town is changing their mind about you, and even if they weren't, they might help anyway. People surprise you sometimes." That evening, Rebecca made a phone call to Pastor Williams at the church. Then she made another call and another. By the time she went to bed, she'd spoken to nearly 20 people, telling them about Jacob's debt, about the men who'd come to collect, about the week they had to come up with the money. The next morning, she didn't know what to expect. Maybe nothing. Maybe judgment. Maybe people would say it was exactly what she deserved for taking in a gambler and his son. But at 9 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Chen from the hardware store stood on the porch holding an envelope. "I heard about your trouble," he said gruffly. "This is $300. It's what I can spare." Before Rebecca could thank him, another truck pulled up. Then another. By noon, her kitchen table was covered with envelopes, cash, and checks. People she barely knew. People who had whispered about her at the auction. People who had turned their backs were now showing up to help. Mrs. Patterson from the general store brought $400 from her savings. The Lee family, who owned the big farm down the road, contributed $1,000. Young couples brought $50, and elderly folks on fixed incomes brought whatever they could spare. Pastor Williams arrived with the church emergency fund, nearly $2,000 that the congregation had voted to donate. By late afternoon, they had $8,000. It was incredible, overwhelming, but it still wasn't enough. They needed $7,000 more, and Rebecca was running out of people to ask. Eli had been watching the procession of visitors all day from his spot near the window. Now he tugged on Rebecca's sleeve. "What about my college money?" he asked quietly. Rebecca and Jacob both looked at him in surprise. Jacob knelt down to his son's level. "What college money, buddy?" "Mom's money. The money she saved for me before she got sick. It's in the bank in Eagle Ridge, remember? She told me about it." Jacob's face went white. He'd completely forgotten about Ellen's savings account, the money she'd scraped together from selling her homemade preserves and quilts, determined that their son would have a chance at education. It had been in Eli's name untouched since her death because Jacob couldn't bear to go to the bank and see her name on the documents. "Eli, that's your future," Jacob said, his voice thick. "That's for college, for building a life. What's the point of college if we're not together?" Eli said with simple child logic, "We need you here, Dad. Rebecca and Grace need you." "I need you." Jacob pulled his son into a tight hug, his shoulders shaking. After a long moment, he pulled back and looked at Rebecca. "The account has about $6,000 in it. Combined with what the town had already donated, it would be enough. Just barely enough." The next day, Jacob and Rebecca drove to Eagle Ridge together, Grace sleeping in her car seat in the back. At the bank, Jacob signed the papers with shaking hands, withdrawing money his late wife had saved penny by penny for their son's education. It felt like a betrayal, like he was letting Ellen down one more time. "She'd understand," Rebecca said softly, reading his expression. "She'd want Eli to have his father. That's worth more than any college fund." When they returned to Hollow Creek, they stopped at the church. The community had gathered there, nearly 100 people crowded into the small building. Rebecca stood at the front and told them what they'd managed to collect, how the town had come together to raise $15,000 to save one man from his past. Jacob made mistakes, she said, her voice carrying through the silent room, but he's spent every day since trying to make up for them. He's helped half the people in this room fix something or build something without asking for payment. He's shown up day after day, proving that people can change. And today, because of all of you, he gets to keep proving it. Because of you, a little boy gets to keep his father. Because of you, we get to stay a family. There wasn't a dry eye in the building. Even the people who had been most critical, most judgmental, were wiping away tears. When Vincent and his men returned on the appointed day, they found something they hadn't expected. The entire town was there, standing in Rebecca's front yard like a human wall. Jacob walked forward with an envelope containing $15,000 in cash and checks. "This is everything I owe you," he said. "We're square." Vincent took the envelope and counted it carefully. When he was satisfied, he nodded. "We're square." He looked around at the crowd, at the determined faces, at the community that had rallied around one of their own. "You got lucky, Thorne. You got people who care about you. Don't waste it." "I won't," Jacob promised. "Not ever again." As the black truck drove away, the crowd erupted in cheers. People surrounded Jacob, shaking his hand, patting his back, welcoming him fully into the community for the first time. Eli clung to his father's leg, grinning wider than Rebecca had ever seen. Rebecca stood on her porch, holding Grace, watching the celebration, and felt something she hadn't felt since David died. Complete. Whole. Like the broken pieces of her life had somehow rearranged themselves into something even more beautiful than what came before. That evening, after everyone had left and the farm was quiet again, Jacob found Rebecca in the kitchen. "I can't ever repay what you've done," he said. "What everyone's done." "You already have," Rebecca replied. "You gave me help when I needed it most. You brought Eli into our lives. You gave us a chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves." Jacob was quiet for a moment. "Then I need to tell you something. When I was at my lowest, I thought I'd lost everything worth living for. But standing here now with Eli talking again, with this community that gave us a second chance with you and Grace, I realize I was wrong. Life still had good things waiting. I just had to be brave enough to accept help," Rebecca smiled. "Being brave enough to accept help is sometimes harder than being brave enough to give it." Through the window, they could see Eli playing with the farm dog, his laughter carrying on the spring breeze. Grace cooed from her bassinet. The garden was planted, the fence was strong, and the future, for the first time in a long time, looked bright for all of them. The Sunday morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of Hollow Creek Community Church, painting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden pews. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the back wall and spilling out onto the front steps. The whole town had turned out, sensing that something important was about to happen. Rebecca sat in the third row, Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms. Eli sat beside her, swinging his legs and whispering excitedly to the boy next to him. In the months since the debt had been paid, Eli had blossomed into a completely different child. He talked constantly now, making up for 2 years of silence. He'd made friends at school, joined the youth group, and could often be found chattering away about bugs or tractors or whatever had caught his interest that day. Pastor Williams stood at the pulpit, his kind eyes sweeping across the congregation. "We have some special announcements this morning," he said, his voice warm. "Jacob Thorne has asked to speak to the community." "Jacob, come on up." Jacob rose from his seat beside Rebecca, and she saw his hands trembling slightly. Public speaking had never been his strength, and standing in front of the entire town that had once judged him so harshly took more courage than facing down Vincent and his men ever had. He climbed the steps to the pulpit, cleared his throat, and looked out at the sea of faces. 6 months ago, he began, his voice rough but steady. "I stood on an auction platform as a broken man. I'd lost everything. My wife to cancer, my home to bad decisions, my self-respect to grief and gambling. I'd dragged my son down with me, and I couldn't see any way forward except to offer ourselves up like livestock, hoping someone would give us a chance to survive another day." The church was completely silent. Even the babies seemed to sense the importance of the moment and stayed quiet. Most of you turned away that day, and you had every right to. I was a stranger with a history of poor choices. Why would anyone take that risk? Jacob paused, his eyes finding Rebecca. But one person did. A pregnant widow who had every reason to protect herself and her unborn child, chose instead to bet on a broken man and his silent son. She didn't just give us work. She gave us dignity. She gave us family. She gave us hope. Rebecca felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Grace stirred in her arms but didn't wake. And then, Jacob continued, when my past came back to threaten everything we'd built, this community, this town that had every reason to let me face the consequences of my actions alone, stood with us. You gave your hard-earned money, your savings, your children's college funds to save someone who hadn't earned it. You showed me what grace really means. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, his hands shaking. I've spent the last 2 months paying back every single person who contributed to my debt. Not because I had to, but because I wanted you to know that your faith in me wasn't misplaced. Every dollar has been returned. A murmur of surprise rippled through the congregation. Many people had insisted they didn't want repayment, that their contribution had been a gift. But Jacob had worked extra jobs, sold things, saved every penny until he could return what had been given. But that's not enough, Jacob said. Money can't repay what you did. So Rebecca and I have been talking and we've made a decision. He looked back at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. We're going to turn part of the farm into something we're calling Hope Haven. It'll be a place where families who are struggling, who've hit rock bottom like I did, can come to live and work and rebuild their lives. We'll provide housing, meals, and meaningful work. No judgment, no shame, just a chance to start over with dignity. The church erupted in whispers. Jacob held up his hand. We're not rich. We can't help everyone, but we can help some. And maybe if it works, other communities will see what's possible when people choose compassion over judgment. Pastor Williams was openly crying now, not even trying to hide it. Several people in the congregation were reaching for tissues. The hard-bitten farmer in the back row, who never showed emotion, had his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. There's one more thing, Jacob said, and now his voice cracked with emotion. He looked directly at Rebecca. Rebecca Chen, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me work when I needed purpose. You trusted me with your safety when you went into labor. You stood by me when dangerous men came calling. You showed me that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up every day and choosing to love people even when it's hard. He came down from the pulpit and walked to where Rebecca sat. Eli bounced excitedly in his seat, clearly in on whatever was happening. Jacob knelt down in front of Rebecca, pulling a simple ring from his pocket. I know I'm not what you planned for. I know I come with baggage and a past and a son who talks your ear off from morning till night. Eli giggled at that. But I love you. I love you for your strength and your kindness and the way you hum off key while you cook breakfast. I love how you mother Grace and how you've mothered Eli like he was our own from day one. I love the family we've become together. Will you marry me? Will you make this strange, beautiful, impossible family official? Rebecca couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down her face so fast she could barely see. She managed to nod, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time as Jacob slid the simple silver band onto her finger. The whole church burst into applause and cheers. Eli launched himself at both of them, wrapping his arms around Rebecca's waist. Does this mean you'll really be my mom? Like, officially? Officially, Rebecca managed to choke out. If that's okay with you, it's more than okay. It's perfect. Grace chose that moment to wake up and let out a loud cry as if adding her own approval to the proceedings. The congregation laughed, the sound joyful and full of hope. Pastor Williams wiped his eyes and raised his hands for quiet. Well, I think that settles what we're doing next Sunday. We've got a wedding to plan, folks, and I can't think of a better way to celebrate what this community has become. After the service, people crowded around Jacob and Rebecca, offering congratulations and volunteering to help with the wedding and with Hope Haven. Mrs. Patterson promised to donate fabric for curtains in the new family housing. Mr. Chen offered to help with construction at cost. The Lee family said they'd contribute food from their farm for the first families who came to stay. Elderly Mrs. Martinez, who'd been one of the most vocal critics at the auction, took Rebecca's hand. I was wrong about you, she said simply. I thought you were naive. But you weren't naive. You were wise in a way the rest of us had forgotten. You saw people for who they could become, not just who they were. You've taught this whole town something important. What's that? Rebecca asked. That second chances aren't just for the people receiving them. They're for the people giving them too. We all get to be better than we were. The following Sunday, the church was even more packed than before. Rebecca stood at the back in a simple white dress that the women of the town had helped her alter, from one her mother had worn. Grace was dressed in a tiny yellow outfit, held by Mrs. Patterson, who'd volunteered to watch her during the ceremony. Eli stood next to Jacob at the altar, his role as best man taken very seriously, his hair slicked back and his new suit making him look impossibly grown up. As Rebecca walked down the aisle, she thought about how far they'd all come. A year ago, she'd been a widow wondering how she'd survive alone. Jacob had been a broken man being auctioned off like property. Eli hadn't spoken in 2 years. None of them had known the others existed. Now they were becoming a family in the eyes of God and community. But really, they'd been a family for months already. The ceremony was just making official what their hearts had known for a long time. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, and Jacob kissed Rebecca gently while the congregation cheered, there wasn't a dry eye in the building. People who had come to witness a wedding found themselves witnessing something larger. They were seeing proof that redemption was real, that people could change, that love could grow in the most unlikely places, and that communities became strongest when they chose compassion over judgment. At the reception in the church hall, old Mr. Rodriguez from the newspaper asked if he could interview them for an article. "People need to hear this story," he said. "In a world full of bad news, they need to know that good things still happen, that people still help each other." The article ran the following week with the headline, "From Auction Block to Altar: How One Woman's Gamble Saved More Than 2 Lives." It told the story of Rebecca's impulsive bid, of Jacob's transformation, of Eli finding his voice again, of a community learning to give second chances. The article was picked up by regional papers, then by national news outlets. Letters started arriving at the farm. Other people who'd hit rock bottom, who needed help, who wanted information about Hope Haven. Young couples struggling with addiction. Single parents escaping bad situations. Veterans dealing with trauma. All of them looking for what Jacob had found, a chance to rebuild with dignity and support. 5 years later, Hope Haven had expanded to house 6 families at a time. Eli, now 12, had become something of a counselor to the younger kids who came through, sharing his own story of loss and healing. Grace, a bright and talkative 5-year-old, had never known a time when their home wasn't full of people who needed help. Jacob had become a licensed addiction counselor, specializing in grief and trauma. He'd gone back to school, determined to offer more than just manual labor to the people who came to Hope Haven. He wanted to help heal the wounds inside, the ones that couldn't be fixed with a hammer and nails. Rebecca had written a book about their journey, with all proceeds going to fund Hope Haven. She spoke at churches and community centers about the power of taking risks on people, about building family through choice rather than blood, about the way helping others ends up healing yourself. But on quiet evenings, when the families at Hope Haven had settled in for the night, and Grace was tucked into bed and Eli was doing homework at the kitchen table, Jacob and Rebecca would sit on their rebuilt porch and remember that auction day. They'd remember the judgment and the fear and the impossible leap of faith that had changed everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob would ask sometimes. "Taking us in that day?" And Rebecca would always smile and shake her head. "Not for a single second. You gave me back my purpose. You gave me a family. You gave me a reason to believe in hope again." "We gave each other that," Jacob would correct her gently. And he was right. They had saved each other. These broken people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment. They'd built something beautiful from their pain, something that now helped others build beauty from their own pain. The town of Hollow Creek had changed too. They'd learned that the measure of a community wasn't in how it treated people when they were successful, but in how it treated people when they'd failed. They'd learned that everyone deserves a second chance, and that sometimes the people you least expect become the pillars your community stands on. And whenever someone new came to Hollow Creek, struggling and afraid and convinced they'd lost everything, the townspeople would tell them about the pregnant widow and the mountain man and the silent boy. They'd tell them about an auction that changed lives, about a community that learned to choose love over judgment, about second chances in chosen families and the miraculous things that happen when people decide to help instead of turning away. Because some stories aren't just stories. Some stories are roadmaps showing the rest of us how to be better, how to love harder, how to believe that tomorrow can be brighter than today, no matter how dark things look right now. And this story, the story of Hope Haven and the family that started it all, became one of those roadmaps. A reminder that the bravest thing you can do is bet on someone when everyone else has turned away. And that sometimes the people you save end up saving you right back.